Welcome back, Scott. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? In your
It's always
golf
good.
for sure.
Yep. Ready for golf. Uh, this week, I want to pick up on your brain on consequences of chronic dieting. We kind of touched up about menstrual cycle last time, but there are more than just that. And maybe you can open up and talk about what other things can happen. And I think we kind of have women starting to speak about it more, but obviously you have quite vast experience with this, and I just want to know about your experience and how you would deal with these things when they come up, specifically like when the metabolism sort of slows down. Well, we know it doesn't slow down; it just adapts to what you're doing to it, and
Mhm.
all other kind of things. So, floor is yours.
Yeah, I see that almost with every client coming through the door, new client or new potential client, they've been in a state of chronic dieting or chronic energy deficit. Um, and typically, it seems to be seemingly worse with the fitness industry, past or post competitors that they've competed, they've gotten a taste of that level of leanness that's acquired for the stage. And then they've had that, dreaded rebound effect and put on some weight and they don't like it and they try to get right back off again. And they essentially just end up living in this energy deficit nonstop. And all the while, the body is adapting. And really, what happens is they just dig themselves a hole and have no idea how to climb back out of it. And it's actually quite problematic. And like you say, we're seeing it more, I think, than we should. And definitely, that's definitely my experience. Absolutely.
Well, just this morning, I saw this one girl, actually from Canada, how she was talking about how she looked amazing, but she was literally struggling inside out. Like her body was giving up on her, and she even developed some skin issues and so on and so forth. So, why do you think it is? In my opinion, it's only because every single girl thinks that they need to take something to get in shape. Like I've had people that I coached, women specifically, that were approached by guys predominantly, and like, what are you taking to get in shape? And I'm like, and they genuinely are surprised. What do you mean what I'm taking? Because they don't understand that majority of people taking some fat burners, some drugs, and this and that. I'm like, if you need that to get somebody in shape, you probably are not knowledgeable enough to coach anyone. That's number one. But they were really upset about it until I told them, like, look, that's a great compliment because somebody tells you you are taking drugs when you're not. So in their eyes, you look unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
So what? And I think that really plays big role about why girls specifically go to these extremes because they think they need to, otherwise they're not going to get in that shape. Is it actually possible to be, like high level physique, uh, aesthetically and physically healthy without going to those extremes where you lose
Yeah,
it?
we've talked about that before quite a few times. It absolutely is possible. It just depends on the context and what someone's trying to achieve. The way I typically tell my clients, if you are in the fitness industry, the IFBB Pro bikini bodybuilding figure, whatever that organization, um, the ones on stage at the Olympia level that are doing well, they're just not natural. And we know this, and I don't think anyone is honestly disagreeing with this, but there are absolutely high level athletes that don't need or don't use a whole bunch of things to get where they're at. Genetics is probably the most relevant factor here. If your genetics are in such a way that you're meant for that sport or that category or that whatever, that's hard to. It's hard for you to not be successful if you're trying, because your genetics are just
Mm.
that powerful. Um, and then it would depend on what someone means by looking a certain way. Like, I do not think a female needs to be on drugs or use fat burners to get in shape. They can have a level of body fat that is extremely low in the eyes of the general public. They could look like um, an athlete, have an athletic body, have a bikini body without using fat burners. They absolutely could. It just depends on their setup and their approach and their patience, essentially. But normally, people want everything quickly, and they don't want to do what is needed to be done to achieve that. And I think part of the problem is that what's needed to be done is either not well known or completely ignored, because what's needed to be done, as you know, is you need a certain lifestyle and you need to just sort of constantly have progress happening. It doesn't have to be overnight. It's a lifestyle. It's just a way of doing things, and that is requires patience, and people don't have that. They want to all of a sudden have their summer body ready because summer's here, and so they want to have it done in 8, 10, 12 weeks. But if they're just planning a lifestyle or or a schedule or some sort that is in favor of lean muscle accrual or at least retention, they're not eating like crap all the time, they're mindful of things, their body will be progressing the entire time. But nobody wants that. They want it now. And then usually what happens is they resort to somebody that looks the part, and that person that looks the part probably used the drug and starved and offers that same information. And so they follow suit. And then what happens is they get the results quickly. Then they can't sustain those results. So then they have a bit of a backlash or a rebound, and then they try to do it again, and it just becomes this vicious cycle. And before you know it, the body just adapts to the scenario that they're in, the environment that it's in, and they find that all their previous attempts that worked stopped working, and they don't know why. So they push it a little harder, a little more drug, a little less food, a little more cardio, and they just keep digging the hole deeper.
Let me know, does it seem to you similar that ways that it seems to me is that people are just asking the wrong question,
Mm-hmm.
specifically women. Like they always go about how do I lose body fat? And it will always give you an extreme answer. Hey, calorie deficit, do this, do that. I only talk about it because one of my friends from New York this morning, he was asking me, what's the best HIIT or resistance training for women to lose body fat? I'm like, well, if you asked me what is the best way to be healthy and lose body fat, I would say you need to start eating right. When you give me those two choices, I'll go resistance training anytime. But when you give me the correct question, the answer will be very different. So, do you think there is a work to be done to kind of make sure the girls are not focusing on weight loss, not focusing on fat loss, because that's essentially gonna lead to like prolonged low energy intake, and rather focus on how can I be leaner and healthier?
Yes, and I think that's exactly the problem. I think it's just contextual. They're not aware of what either they're asking, or they're not aware of what's involved. I do think that, and they give timelines that are just unrealistic. I do think that what should be in place is a lifestyle that's sustainable, that has things aligned with the goals or with the tools needed to achieve the goal. And if it's fat loss, I mean, obviously it depends on many, many, many things. But if it's fat loss, it's really quite easy. It's all about energy. Um, but I find that women, when they come to me, if they've never done this before, and this happens all the time actually, if they've never dieted before, they come here, the results are almost instantaneous, and there is almost never a hurdle to get over. It's just like a linear shot to the goal accomplished. But if I get somebody that has experienced in the fitness industry, they've normally been run through a gauntlet, and their response time is a little bit different. It varies for sure. And almost always, the first thing that I do is not put them in an energy deficit because it's the last thing they need because they've been living in it for God knows how long. I think what they need to have put in place is a way of eating that's sustainable and realistic, uh, a training schedule that's also sustainable and realistic, and things to measure that show progress in those aspects as opposed to just what the scale says. Because the scale, depending on how, how adapted their metabolism has been or the physiology is from their previous experiences, the scale could be quite stubborn. And the fat loss depends how they're measuring it. If they're using a scale to measure it, obviously it's going to tell you things that possibly aren't true. If they're spending money on DEXs regularly, they would see linear progress, but they're not going to do that. So they're not going to see that. If they use calipers, those are mostly linear and it's my go-to, but there will still be times where the calipers will show a skewed value, especially if their menstrual cycle is not disrupted yet. When that late luteal phase is upon them, typically that skinfold caliper measurements will be blipped upwards. The tricep, for example, for whatever reason, constantly goes up, or the suprailiac, and these kinds of things are normal. They're expected, but if they're not understood, they cause fear or a reaction, panic, and then right away the scale went up and the caliper didn't budge. They want to get the diet going, cut the calories again or increase the cardio, and that's just not the answer. That is only the answer when you've established a certain physiology that's ready for that protocol, and then it will be very responsive. If it's not ready for that, you have to deal with a lot of hurdles and variables on the way, and hope to God that you can, keep sanity and keep them coaxing along. But normally there's a bit of a, backlash.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of specifically women who compete who end up falling off completely, and then they do such a massive turnaround. And it's interesting for me if you can explain what happens in human body when they eat right, but they don't eat enough.
When they eat right, but they don't eat enough,
Yeah,
at
well,
the end of the day,
their concept of healthy. Like, let's say with guys, I'll give you an example because I work with very big dudes, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm hitting my calories." Yeah, but those calories are just sweet, sugary garbage. Like, no wonder you have issues with your kidneys, with your liver, with everything. You're inflamed like a balloon, and you have every single possible issue you can imagine. But you're hitting your calories. Like, it's not about calories, it's about eating healthier. But for women, it's usually not about just eating healthier. They just don't get enough calories.
yes,
So what the
there
hell
is
is happening there?
yeah, there definitely is the difference between the two genders is quite obvious with this, and that is the case. Females are notoriously eating healthy, and what they're eating, and I see this quite a bit. They'll have salads. I have salads, and I've got cucumbers and tomatoes and a fat-free dressing and some chicken in it. Like, well, that's great. That's like 300 or 400 calories at the most, and that's actually quite satisfying in terms of satiety because of the salad is quite voluminous. So that could keep them satisfied or full for hours. So if you have a female that's eating 3 or 4 meals that are similar to that a day, that is their daily caloric intake, and they're flirting with 1,000 calories. Well, fuck, 1,000 calories is not enough for most people. Like my
Mm.
14-year-old daughter eats double that, and she's by no means in any concern of getting excessive body fat. Like that's just not going to happen. So typically, what's happening is they're eating quality food. So it's micronutrient dense, calorically poor foods, which is good, but they're still not getting enough. So it's like they're getting paid in the right currency, but they're still not getting enough money. So at the end of the day, they don't have enough to pay the bills, and the body has to adapt. Even though, yes, it's real money that they're getting, they're just not getting enough. Now, the one good thing about, and this seems to be super common with females, they do eat healthy. They eat that nutrient dense, calorically poor foods like the butcher and produce aisles. And that's really good. But because they don't eat enough, they still run deficiencies. And that's at the end of the day, that's what's going on. Even though it's the right foods, it's not enough of them. So it's like anything else. If you have the right gas, you don't have enough of it, it's still not going to do what you need it to do. If it was a man doing the same thing, it would be worse because not only would it be not enough calories, but it would be poor choice calories. So the micronutrients would be even less and the deficiency would come upon even quicker. So typically what's going on with the females is it's a low energy availability. That is the problem. The body has to adapt. Even though the food quality is high and they are getting some of those micronutrients that are very, very necessary, they're just not getting enough of them. And so the body adapts, and the body adapts in priority. What does the body need to keep you alive, to keep your heart beating? And it just goes through, not on your opinion or what you think or how you feel. It goes through its environment. What is it? Where am I? What do I have to do to survive? And it just goes through and figures it out. And it distributes the high quality, low amount of food you're eating. It distributes it where it needs to go in terms of the system of the body to keep the things that matter to keep you alive functioning as properly as it can. It will not prioritize your aesthetic goals if it doesn't have enough when it has to consider your blood pressure and your heart rate and your pH levels and all those other things. That's typically why regularly how do I put this, normal menstruating women, like a healthy reproductive female, um that's typically why you'll start to see irregular menstrual cycles happening in them, is because at some point, if that nutrient deficiency, caloric energy threshold availability that's too low continues, the body will just start to prioritize things, and reproduction will not be one of them. And so you'll start to see that irregular menstrual cycle, which leads to amenorrhea. And then before you know it, the long-term consequences of, missing your period for 20 years becomes real.
Talk me through that. So, would you say that missing period would be the number one red flag? Hey, if this is happening, maybe put the brakes on, even if you are a competitive bodybuilder, or would you not go that far?
Um, a natural bodybuilder, yeah, that would be a major red flag. I would actually probably that's an absolute red flag for sure. There might be other things you might notice before that becomes apparent. For a drug using female bodybuilder, it's not so much a red flag anymore because the exogenous hormonal use can cause these kind of problems anyways. In fact, sometimes they're done intentionally. So that's hard to say. But in general, yes, if you're starting to see an irregular menstrual period and you're an athlete, there's a huge chance that it's an energy balance problem. You might want to rule out pregnancy and rule out, some sort of prolactinoma or something like that. And typically that's not the case with the athletes. It almost certainly comes down to the energy availability is too low, and the body is starting to show you signs of adaptation to a low energy threshold, and that's what happens. The period starts to become irregular.
So, what are the consequences of losing period? Talk me through that.
Well, I mean, right off the bat, if you don't have your menstrual cycle, you could run the risk of infertility. So if female wants to have a family at some point, that's very relevant. And oftentimes you see females are trying to have a physique to look a certain way to find Mr. Right to start a family, and they could really be doing themselves a disservice if they're living in that chronic energy deficit for sure. Um, but really, it's the long-term effects of basically hypogonadism. Like they have low hormones. If your menstrual cycle is irregular because your hormones are essentially deficient, so you're fast tracking yourself to menopause. And that's not that necessarily that's a bad thing, but it might not be what you want. And if you do have low levels of things like estrogen, progesterone, etc., you do run the risks of cardiovascular issues, bone mineral density losses, which is a very big concern for females as they age. And that's because the hormones are lacking and or have been lacking for so long that those adaptations have just continued. And the problem with this is it's not going to happen in a month or a year. It's going to happen in 10 or 20 years down the road
Mm.
because it's so slow and the body's so resilient and there's so many compounding factors that attribute to these things or are hindrance to these things. That's just not one thing. So by the time it's a problem, it's a problem.
Talk me into amenorrhea. What's the difference between losing period and what happens afterwards?
What do you mean? Like what happens afterwards?
Is it the same thing, or is it like basically prolonged loss of period, or is it more than one or two cycles when you class it as amenorrhea, or what's happening there?
So there's how do they word this? There's primary and secondary amenorrhea. I think the primary amenorrhea is I don't have the definitions in front of me, but it's something to do with you have not had a menstrual cycle by a certain age. Usually, it's a genetic component, something that's going to be medically intervened. Secondary amenorrhea is usually after your period has been missed or irregular. Usually, the cessation of the menstrual cycle for I think it's around 3 months or more would be classified as amenorrhea. Or if you have any irregular period for like 5 or 6 months, that could be classified as amenorrhea. That those would both be secondary amenorrhea, and typically those are from acute situations. It's not a genetic component. It's not a theoretically a health concern. So it could be a pregnancy. It could be perimenopausal. The volatile part of a female's life where they're making that transition or the journey to menopause. So age could be an indicator. Like if you're middle age and you're starting to see irregular menstrual cycles, it might not be energy availability. It might be perimenopause. Or it could just be with athletes, it's either chronic dieting or high level output, like lots and lots and lots of activity. So essentially, either the chronic dieting or the high output is causing the same thing, which is an energy deficit, extreme energy deficit, or an energy deficit for a long period of time. That amenorrhea is basically the outcome.
So, what is happening in a sense of metabolism when you get to that point? Does it affect how your body can deal with nutrients, how it responds to training, all those kind of things?
Um, yes, and then it would be quite contextual and complex from how and why, but essentially when we're looking at athletes, the cause of secondary amenorrhea is that energy availability threshold is being crossed. So by definition, we know you're in an energy deficit. So the consequences are the things that we know about. The metabolism is adapted. It's an adaptation to the low available energy. And then from that point, the lack of ability for the body to do all the things it wants to do, it's going to cause a reduction in things like sex hormones. That's why the amenorrhea basically has begun. So you just get this adaptation to a low energy environment where the body is trying to prioritize heart rate and life and not athleticism and aesthetics. So essentially, it's just you don't have enough raw material for the body to do everything, so it starts prioritizing. So from that point of view, you're going to have less sex hormones, which do impact things like libido, fertility, athletic performance, recovery, your ability to strength train in general, and then with the low calories, it's the same sort of thing. The metabolism also has to basically adapt because if you don't have enough food coming in, it has to preserve what it has, what it can, for what it needs for survival.
So, what would be your recovery protocol for somebody? First of all, I think number one would be good luck with sorting out your mindset. But that aside, let's say there is not a struggle, there is not no back push or anything, and person really wants to get themselves back into healthy kind of position. What would be your number one choice? Would be, hey, we are up in your calories, or we are up in your carb intake, or hey, we are reducing this or improving that. What would be number one step?
Uh, the number one step for me would be to increase calories. Where would depend on what they've been eating. Oftentimes, what I see is females restricting carbohydrates because you reduce carbohydrates, you reduce body water, therefore you lower body weight. They think that all of a sudden that's helping them accomplish their goal of getting leaner. Um, so they're starving their body of carbs completely. If I see that, I typically add calories via carbohydrates there and prepare them for weight gain. Um, but in general, I don't have a specific macronutrient that I want to increase unless it's deficient. Like obviously, if they had very, very low dietary fat intake and we know that we need some for hormonal function, etc., I would try to remedy that.
Would
Obviously,
this
if the goal is
specific thing, specifically fat intake, would it change for you for somebody who's natural as opposed to somebody who's enhanced?
yes, somebody that's natural, I would want to have probably 20 to 30% of their calories coming from dietary fats. And I would want those dietary fats relatively evenly distributed between saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats. Like a third, a third, a third is a good, very good general guideline, which makes things very, very easy. You choose your saturated fats from lean protein sources that come from an animal because now you've got optimal everything. Have some fatty fish in your diet aside from that animal protein. There'll be the exception of some fatty fish, or you can supplement, but I would prefer they eat. And then you choose things like nuts and seeds, olive products, olive oil, olives in general, nut butters. And now you've nailed your fat profile a third, a third, a third, almost automatically by just choosing the foods as Mother Nature created them. And that's an awesome, very effective, very accurate way to do that. Um, if you don't want to work percentages of calories, I would say 0.25 to zero point 0.5 grams per pound would be a minimum. 0.25 would be the minimum fat intake, I would say. Um, because the body composition does come into factor there a little bit. So it depends on how you
Again,
want to
what
work
you're
that.
saying now
Uh,
is, would it be different for men and women? Because I see a lot of guys who coach women and they will go just crazy lower fat.
I would only go lower fat, like crazy lower fat, if they were providing their body with exogenous hormones, which many in the fitness industry are, because your dietary fats help build that cholesterol pool. And the cholesterol is where the raw materials are chosen or derived from to create your sex hormones. Um, so if you go crazy, crazy, crazy low dietary fats and have no exogenous hormonal support, you don't have the raw materials properly produce your endogenous hormones. So over time, again, this could take months, but over time, you're going to run into an issue for sure. So I would never do that to a female unless she was taking exogenous hormones. For a male, the difference isn't really, it's the difference is only in the amount. I don't think the physiology is that different. A man can get away with less fat for sure. But still, I would never go to nothing. And you can't go to nothing. You can't eat and you have zero fat. So you really, if you're taking exogenous hormones, you could purposely set out to not eat dietary fats at all. And you'll still have enough dietary fats because you won't be able to avoid them completely. So it's not a concern, to me anyway. But for a natural athlete who's not, I would prioritize them being specific with some fat intake, and I would want it be coming from, like I said, all three of the dietary fats, not just a saturated fat profile. But it would depend on the goal and what they're trying to achieve. And then if they're obviously deprived themselves from carbohydrates, that is the variable macronutrient where it depends. You don't need carbs to survive. Your body will be fine. But usually what you see is females doing HIIT training and F45 and boot camps and all these things, and then not using carbohydrates as a fuel source. Well, that's a problem because now your ability to replete glycogen without carbs is reduced or hindered, or at least it's slower. And your ability to deplete glycogen is massively increased with that type of training. So now you can start to run your body into the ground, if that's your strategy. And for a long time here, that was the trend. It was boot camps with low carb diets, and
Yeah,
that
you
was
lose
where
a lot of body weight.
ideology into the
But
ground.
understand that it's you're losing body weight, you're not losing body fat.
Correct. The body is not being tricked or fooled by anybody. The body the body is set to survive. And yeah, if you're just manipulating macronutrient distributions to manipulate body weight, that might not have anything to do with body fat. I mean, I had a client that had to make weight this past weekend. We took his, it was a male. We took his weight down 20 pounds in 4 days. And not one of those pounds was fat. That was strictly glycogen, sodium, and fluid dynamic manipulation on purpose to make weight. And he went right back up 20 pounds the next day. Well, it took a little more, it took about 30 hours before his event. And that's got nothing to do with body fat. And it would work the exact same way as the female. I've done it. It wouldn't be 20 pounds because they're not that big. They're smaller, so it's all relative, but it's the same thing. So oftentimes that's part of the problem is females chase weight loss on the scale, thinking that that's equal to fat loss, and it might not be. I can make your weight move without changing your body fat levels at all.
Yeah, literally 1 hour in a bed will make me lose 1 kilo of body weight. So
Yeah,
if
I
I sleep
believe it.
7 hours, I will wake up 7 kilos lighter.
I believe that. I believe that totally. And
It's
it's
also because
relative
I'm the
to
size
your
of
size.
baby elephant. I'm not really 80 kilo guy. I'm a larger person, so it takes a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But then I regain all that weight within a day's eating.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of that weight fluctuation is the food mass you consume and the water that comes along with it. And that's what we try to manipulate in a weight class event. We play on those variables because that's exactly what, because I can't make you lose fat. I can't make you lose 20 pounds of fat in a week. That's not fucking possible unless we like hacked off, some limbs. So like look, the body is way too adaptive and responsive to that type of extreme fluctuation in actual morphological tissue. Like you're not going to lose lean contractile tissue or adipose tissue to the point of pounds in days. Like that, the body won't do that. If you were morbidly obese, you could probably lose a few pounds of body fat in a week, sure. But a large portion of the weight you lose in that week is not actual adipose tissue. It just can't be. If it was that easy to move actual morphological tissue that well, we wouldn't have the problems that we see that are chronic, right? Like starving kids and obesity. Obesity wouldn't be a thing if we could lose fat that quickly. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, so you would not look at calories itself as much as you would look in making sure that equation of food quality is supported as well. Not just, hey, let's eat candies and donuts and whatnot.
Well, so the calories have to get to the threshold for sure. Otherwise, you can eat all the healthiest foods in the world. If you don't eat enough of them, it doesn't tip the tipping point. So we have to get to the threshold, but I would be very cognitive of the types of foods depending on the person. Typically, with females, from my experience, they eat so healthy all the time that they're full, but they need to eat more. So there might be a scenario where, like, look, I need those calories up. And if you physically can't eat more, then go drink Kool-Aid because the calories still have to get up. I don't think it's the best way, but if you don't get the calories up, you don't get out of the problem. So until the calories are where they need to be, that has to be the priority. It's no different than when you work with anybody that has had eating disorders. The number one thing that they try to do is remove the energy deficit. They don't care if it's through salad, kale, or chicken. They care that it's energy. The energy availability has to cross that threshold for the adaptations to change. And until that happens, you'll spin your wheels. So we have to remedy that first. Ideally, we remedy that with nutrient dense food because you need the nutrients, but we have to do one thing at a time.
So you would fall if somebody is like in a chronic energy deficit, they are doing a lot of trainings, they're doing all kind of stuff. You wouldn't necessarily cut back on training and nutrition increase at the same time. You would just start with one, right?
If I could, I would start with one, yes. But again, it would be contextual because there are people that are just like hyper afraid to not exercise because of that body dysmorphia or disordered eating or an actual eating disorder. I mean, I don't know until I talk to them, but obviously if they're doing like 40,000 steps a day and exercising twice a day, there's no need, nor is there an ability to recover from that likely. So that could be part of the equation of the first thing to remedy. But typically, from my experience, the number one thing that's off, or the most obvious culprit, is the energy in is usually too low.
Mhm.
So it's easier to just add some food than to restrict their activity level, unless their activity level is extreme, which isn't that common from my experience.
Yeah. It depends on mentality, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But it's very interesting. So if you were to advise somebody where to learn more about these kind of things, because we know majority of information now comes from social media posts. How do you kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Foolproof that information they are getting is actually real and not just some kind of catchphrase where somebody tries to sell you some kind of nonsense.
I think they should talk to you or me. But really, I mean, like, get a medical textbook. Like, people have seemingly just almost set aside medical research. Like, it doesn't matter anymore because they don't look like a bodybuilder. Like, this stuff is so well known. Like, if you look through this book is fantastic. Um, there's like a basically a baseline of 1,800 to 2,000 calorie diet. If you look at any fast food joint anywhere in the world, they base all that stuff on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. That 2,000 calorie a day diet isn't just some number they fucking pulled out of their hat. That's a caloric intake that pretty much covers most of the population as a minimum.
Mm.
You have to become in a bit of a niche scenario to not need 2,000 calories to sustain your current body. If you're 100 pounds, probably you don't need 2,000 calories, but you still might, depends on your activity level. So I think if they don't have a source online they can trust, they should just look at medical books, buy one. Even Google a medical question like on your chat GPT or something, like tell it from a medical point of view, how many calories should thou eat? And they'll spit it out. Like, they have recommendations for kids, like doctors that specialize with kids. Like, my son was sick when he was born. We were at Sick Kids for a couple of years, and they have caloric requirements that are established for kids that they didn't just pull these numbers out of their hat, and they're more than what most women are eating now as adults. Like, I would trust some medical texts to a degree and then fine tune it. But I mean, they could just ask the answer.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem that people don't want to do extra little bit of research, even though it's literally their lives that depends on this.
Right,
So
right.
I appreciate you, Scott. I know I need to let you off to work with your clients, and I'll see you in next videos and we carry on this.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.